right, thank you, Mike. Right. So I'll share my screen. Okay. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Yes? Okay, thank you. So thank you, Mike. So yes, today Haluk and I are here to talk about group discussions in remote teaching and hopefully give you some ideas about how to foster discussions in an online environment. So to start off, I'd like to ask you a question, and maybe Haluk, you can start the Zoom poll.
Okay.
Just want to know, how comfortable do you feel about facilitating online discussion in your courses for this fall? So I'll give you we'll give you a few seconds to answer. 20 people answered. Right. Waiting for a couple of responses. All right. I'll end the poll. All right. Okay. So most of you apparently haven't looked at it yet. So hopefully today will give you ideas. I see also that 36% of you are confident. So hopefully you feel more confident after this presentation. Thanks. All right. So, all right, today I'd like to talk about, share my experience about a course that I gave this winter in which discussion was very important. And I'll give you some example of synchronous and asynchronous discussions that I had with my students. And Haluk will be here also to provide you with some existing resources from TLS and elsewhere to hopefully guide you in the planning of your fall session. So without further ado, okay, let's start with the context. So today I'll share activities from my course FRSL 321 from this winter. It's a French course. So as you can imagine, interaction is very important. And this course had only 23 students enrolled. So pretty much group today. The chapter objectives were actually debate and argumentative skills for debate. So discussion was very important for that chapter when we switched to remote delivery in the winter. So of course, there was a challenge on top of the technical difficulties, maybe the fact that communication was in French as a second language. So that adds another level of complexity. And also this might have created some anxiety for the students. So we were trying to think of solution of in order for students not to feel anxious, provide a non-threatening practice environment. So that was the challenge, I would say. But on the plus side, all the students at the time were able to attend synchronously. We know it's not going to be the case in the winter, in the fall, sorry. So we'll try to give you some flexible options for your discussions. And also students had known each other for 8 months at the time of the disruption of classes because it was a D1, D2 course. Before I explain, I give you some examples. There are two types of interaction that we'll be talking about today. So as you can see on the left pattern, there's the first pattern where students discuss in small groups. Then the instructor can go into groups, get feedback. So this can be done, as you know, in Zoom synchronously, but also asynchronously on Bongo group assignment. So on my courses, I'll get back to this later. And on the right side, you can see the other pattern, which you're all familiar with Zoom, the instructor giving a lecture or asking questions to the whole class. In both cases, we have two types of interaction. So instructor-student, I to S, or students to students, S to S. So I'll be reusing those terms today. All right, so we'll start with an example of fixed synchronous discussion activity. So what I've tried to do is break it down into 8 different steps. So hopefully you can use a similar pattern for your fall courses. And what I'm going to present now is for a class that is roughly 60 minutes. So the first thing I think is important to do, of course, is post the homework on my courses. Not only post the homework, but also explain what the next class will be about. In the course evaluation, students mentioned that they liked that the homework was linked to what's going to happen in class, it provided them with motivation, gave them motivation. So I think that would be a good practice. In my case, I gave a theory to read about argumentative strategies, as I was saying. And also there was a reading task. They had to read a text and answer linguistic questions because it was a French course. So this text was here to prepare students for the debate they were going to have in class. So once the class started on Zoom synchronously, I started with a poll with some multiple choice questions to check students' understanding of the theory on argumentative strategies. This gave me an idea of the strengths and weaknesses of my students. And then I gave them a short PowerPoint presentation on Zoom, 15 minutes. So it was a review of the theory they had read about and also some live questions. After that, the first thing we did in terms of discussion was to divide students into small groups. So first thing was to correct the homework, so the reading task. So students were invited to go in breakout rooms and discuss together their answers regarding the text they had read. This was to make sure that they understood everything before we moved to the real debate. What I did, and what I guess TLS is recommending as well, was to appoint a representative for each breakout room. So students were responsible to name one student in the breakout room to report later on the group's discussion. So after that, we went back to the main room and I was asking each group representative to, answer, correct the homework, and we talked together. After that, to prepare for the real debate, I gave students a 10-minute break, sort of. So I gave them open-ended debate question in relation to the text they had read at home. And it was basically pro or against kind of questions. So students had 10 minutes to prepare a list of arguments based on their reading and their personal opinion or knowledge of the topic. And I told them to do it on a piece of paper if they were tired of staring at the screen, or they could have just done it in a Word document. So individually, they prepared this. And then 10 minutes later, in Zoom, I put them back again in breakout rooms, and they had to discuss those open-ended questions together. Sometimes I was actually, every time I was going in the breakout rooms just to listen to what students had to say. And at that stage, I was pretty much only taking notes. I wasn't interfering in the discussions. After that, after 10 minutes, I went back to the main room and I gave students feedback. So as it was a French class, of course, the feedback was on linguistic elements, but it could be on anything else in your class. And also I was giving feedback on the argumentative strategies that I heard the student used during their debate. And so this concluded the discussion. After that, the last thing I did was to assign an asynchronous task. So as a homework, so students in group, the same groups, debate groups, had to write collaborative writing in Word Online. So they had to choose one of the open-ended questions I had given them and that they had debated, and then write a short text about it, reusing the strategies we had seen. So as you see, even if someone wouldn't have been able to come to class, since the lecture was recorded, he could still do the homework and have access to the theory and everything. So that's the first example I wanted to share. And now I'll hand it to Haluk, who will give you some best practices for synchronous discussions.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Hello, everyone. My name is Haluk. I'm an educational technology consultant working at Arts Multimedia Language Facility. Here at AMLF, we have a bunch of content that is available to instructors. We give tips, guidance, tutorials, and consultancy to our instructors. And we also have a YouTube channel. So if you are looking for tips and do's and don'ts of Zoom or how to use Zoom effectively, I invite you to visit our YouTube channel, Arts Multimedia Language Facility. So going over Kevin's example, we thought about, things that could go wrong or keep you, unguarded. That's why we wanted to give you 3 hints that could facilitate this example that Kevin gave you while you're doing it yourself. So the first hint is that remember that when students are divided in the breakout rooms on Zoom, what you post in the chat panel of the Zoom interface will not be visible to students because they are in different rooms, and every breakout room is considered as a different Zoom room. That's why what you write on the main channel will not be visible. And the second tip I wanted to share is that when you are on these breakout rooms, again, for example, this meeting is being recorded right now. And if you were to go to breakout rooms, like separate breakout rooms, only the main channel would be recorded and the separate breakout rooms will not be recorded. So remember and keep that in mind when you're sending your students to breakout rooms. And the last tip that I would like to share today is that it is always a good idea to give time breaks whenever you are creating breakout rooms, because it takes some time, you know, for students to arrange and go to their own course. So like giving 5 minutes or maybe a 10-minute break before sending them to breakout rooms will help with the Zoom fatigue that can happen after long hours of having Zoom conversations. So I'll hand it over to Kevin again right now. And I will share a bunch of sources that you can benefit from in the last slide of this presentation again.
Thanks. And also something you put on your slide, Haluk, was that there is a function to broadcast messages to all breakout room, and it's on the right side of your slide. So there's still this option to broadcast messages, but just don't expect that student will see anything you post in the chat. Yes. Okay, now I'd like to give you another example of discussion activity, but this time a flexible option. So for students living on different time zone, and that's actually something I gave as an assignment to my students in the winter. So again, it was to practice the debate strategies. I proceeded a bit differently. This time I posted the assignment instructions on my courses and also a tutorial. So for the assignment, students had to do a reading again. And this time the open-ended questions were to prepare at home. Again, it was a, are you pro or against something kind of question. So students had to read and prepare the arguments. And since this was going to be done on my courses on Bongo, I posted a tutorial on my courses on Bongo. So just to give you an example, this is a screenshot, it's in French, but it was explaining students how to use Bongo, and as you see, how to set up a meeting in Bongo so that they could record their discussion. I'll show you in a moment what it looks like. Then the second thing would be to form the groups. So you can form your groups or you can let students form the groups. It's up to you. This is all explained in the tutorials that Haluk is going to share with you later. And then to be flexible, I gave 72 hours to my students to set up a meeting time on Bongo, my courses, as I showed you before. And also they had 72 hours to prepare individually, as I said, prepare a list of arguments for their discussion. And then when they were ready, the group was logging into my courses and they were joining a Bongo group assignment, which, as you can see, looks like a Zoom chat room, and students can even share their screen for this kind of presentation or debate. And as you see, it's not always recording. Students have to press the recording button whenever they're ready to record their discussion. So this is providing low stress environment, I would say. All right, and the last thing was to review the discussion. So with Bongo, you can leave feedback, written feedback, for example, next to their video in my courses. And also you could, if it's an assignment, you can link the assignment to rubrics. This way, each student would see where they perform better or not as good as the others, or as they could have done. What I'd like to say also before Haluk explain the resources is that this kind of discussion is interesting because it's flexible, but at the same time, the activity is a live discussion. So I think it's a good compromise, but I'll hand it over to Haluk for the resources.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. So here are some resources that we created at Arts Multimedia Language Facility, as I mentioned. So the first link is the do's and don'ts tutorial that we prepared for our instructors, but feel free to, it's open for everyone. So, and it's also for the Faculty of Arts instructors. So feel free to visit it whenever you like. And there's also a Zoom tutorial for beginners. If you're not aware of the, basic functions of the app, feel free to watch that tutorial as well. And the third one is about Bongo group assignments tutorial. So it's the second example that Kevin gave you. That's the app that we're using, Bongo, to initiate the group assignments. So there's a tutorial on that. And also I shared a web article on advanced Zoom features for educators. Remember I told you it's not possible to share, use the chat during the breakout rooms. So you're gonna have to use a feature, a function of Zoom called broadcast message. So you can also find that in this web article, but it's a pretty long article. So if you're not a very beginner, I suggest you skip some parts of it and read only the parts that is going to be beneficial. And also remember that all these content, including the content we create, can always become outdated very fast because these are apps and software gets updated very frequently. So for best results and for best knowledge database, I always refer everyone to Zoom Help Center. There are many articles there and there are many interesting solutions to different problems that instructors might have. So I also suggest you visit the Zoom Help Center. And last but not least, we have a lot of content, including video tutorials, how-to documents, and frequently asked questions kind of things about all the software we provide at AMLF. So there's a knowledge base that we created. If you click on this link, you can see all of our documents, including our YouTube videos. So also feel free to visit our knowledge base at your convenience. So that's going to be it for today. I'm going to deliver it back to Kevin.
Well, thank you, Haluk. Yeah, and something we didn't mention. So just in case you were wondering, there are 3 types of Bongo activity. There is the individual assignment that you might have seen before, the Q&A, and this one is the group assignment. So you'll find on the AMLF knowledge base all the video tutorials about all these 3 types of assignment. So yeah, I'll hand it over to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ooh, am I unmuted? Yes, I am. Okay, great, perfect. Just to keep things moving, I guess now I'm supposed to hand it over to Naomi. And then after that, I think we have some good questions coming up in the chat, and I'm sure there'll be other questions, and we can answer those after Naomi's presentation.
Wonderful, thanks so much. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen, and while I'm doing the setup here, just to make sure everybody can hear me clearly. Yeah, great. Super. Okay, so thanks so much to Kevin and to Haluk for sharing those really creative strategies and practical examples. What I'd like to focus on is the online discussion forums in my courses, perhaps the more typical written discussion boards, because you may be very familiar with facilitating discussions in the classroom and very comfortable doing so, but it is different when you transpose that into the online context. And of course, that is the case for the remote delivery in the fall. So I'd like to share with you some strategies and tips that you can consider as you plan your courses. So to start off with, why should you even consider using online discussion forums in my courses? And there are a number of benefits, particularly in the remote context. So you've probably heard a lot about the importance of student engagement and interaction in remote learning. And so discussion forums provide a very natural format where students can be encouraged to engage with the course content through reading question prompts, but also they're sharing their reflections and their responses with their peers. So automatically they're getting some of that community formation that is really critical to their engagement and learning as well. And as they're formulating their thoughts and expressing, whether it's through video responses or through written responses as well, they're getting immediate formative feedback from their peers through the conversations that are being generated and the clarity of their thoughts and their responses. And this can actually be a great way of practicing for larger written assignments, for example, their term papers, their kind of scaffolding step by step, their thought process throughout the term. As well, a unique difference with the online discussion forum compared to your in-class discussions is that there's a different timeline. So you may find that students who perhaps are reticent to participate in a live session will be more comfortable participating because they have more time to reflect, first of all, on the initial question, but also they can go do some research and develop their response before posting it. And lastly, it does as well help students to stay on track, and pacing is really important. Again, it's a challenge in remote learning to kind of stay on top of the material, but if students are obliged to participate in topical discussions throughout the term, this can be a real aid in that regard as well. All right, so thinking about planning for meaningful online discussions. What are some of the steps and what are some of the considerations that you should take? Well, first of all, a good conversation or a good discussion starts with a good question. And again, while in the in-person or live discussion context, you may be able to rephrase your question or modify the question on the spot. In the online discussion forum, that's not the case. You have to do that pre-planning in advance. So really thinking out open-ended, meaningful, ideally debatable discussion questions or prompts is key. And I'd like to just draw your attention to an example. Again, this presentation will be shared with you, so you'll have a chance to explore these various links, which have a number of great examples and resources attached to them. But just to call out, this particular example is from the University of Central Florida, and it was an Introduction to Africana Studies course. What the instructor did was they set up a discussion around current events. They posted, in fact, it was a clip of Don Lemon from CNN, and it was some of his opinions about Black culture. And the instructor invited students to either agree or disagree with the statements in Don Lemon's commentary and to draw upon their course readings. And so this was a way of really fostering some critical reflection in the discussion posts. The example does include as well the instructions for the discussion and the rubric that was included. So again, could be an interesting resource for you to review. Clear instructions and expectations. What can come so naturally in a group setting? So when you're all together, either in a Zoom room or of course in the physical classroom, there are kind of the natural understanding of rules and how to go about interacting. Less so in this newer online context. So having really clear instructions is going to help you out a lot. This starts with setting ground rules of what is acceptable behavior, of course, in the online context and the online academic context as well. And you want to ensure that you have noted very well the expectations for students in terms of the number of posts. So this can be both the initial post and perhaps the word count associated with that, if that is appropriate for your learning outcomes, but also the number of responses that you expect to their peers so that there is a meaningful conversation happening. And again, having a rubric that students can refer to guide their participation will be really helpful. I touched a little bit on the length and the format. You can think as well about a suggested format for student responses. So it may be for them to identify an aspect of their colleagues' post that they found interesting, but then they need to extend that somehow or pose another question as a way of ensuring that the conversation doesn't stop prematurely. As well, the role and timing of discussions. So it's, again, helpful to have guidelines as to when the initial post is due, and then by when students need to have responded to their peers as well. And again, this type of structure will be helpful, I think, especially as you're getting the conversations up off the ground at the beginning of term and as students get into the flow as well. So again, I'll draw your attention to a discussion guideline document from the University of Colorado Boulder. It's an open source document, so you can certainly draw on this as an example or a template that you may wish to adapt to your course. And lastly, appropriate grading scheme. So it certainly takes effort to participate in a meaningful discussion, whether that's in the classroom or online. And so to take a look at what would be an appropriate percentage to assign for students' participation, providing that extra extrinsic motivation for their participation as well. And interesting idea to help with evaluating student participation is an example of our participation portfolio. And this idea, again, with the link providing a much more detailed explanation, but is the idea that students over the course of the term will collect examples of their own work or participation in discussion forums that they think are exemplary and that reflect their understanding of the course material and their contributions. They put this together in a portfolio to submit to you at the end or towards the end of term for you to then evaluate. And this provides a nice opportunity for students to reflect as well on their own participation and contributions. Okay, so facilitating effective online discussions. You've got it all set up nicely, but you still need to make sure that it is rolling along well. So instructor presence online is really critical for students to also engage. In terms of timing, at the beginning of term, you might find that it's necessary for you to be more involved. Again, as students are getting the hang of participating effectively in discussion boards. But as the term proceeds, you should be able to, allow them to keep that ball rolling. In terms of prompts, again, the idea is that you may be, your role is more to perhaps provide guiding questions for students to build off of, and provided a link to some interesting discussion prompting questions as well. Another way to participate would be to provide a summary at the end of the discussion post or module, so that you're connecting it back to the course content, calling out main themes or clarifications as needed. Now, another option to consider would be student-facilitated discussions. And so this would require, again, clear guidelines for the students, but you could assign, say, 1 or 2 students for that discussion forum to take the lead of connecting the posts that their peers are making and elaborating. And so this can be an interesting experience for them as well. I'll draw your attention to the example from the University of Waterloo linked here, where they have a really detailed structured guidelines that were given for students who are facilitating discussions. All right, and just to wrap up here, I think this perhaps builds nicely onto what Kevin and Haluk have already shared, but when you're thinking about combining fixed and flexible discussion activities, of course, with the intent of having your students being able to participate wherever they're located, consider the following sequence to build around a fixed discussion activity. So how are you priming your students beforehand, before the fixed activity? One idea could be to have small group online discussions using the My Courses discussion forums. And then this could be focused around perhaps reading related questions. Then when you get to the fixed session, you can be extending that into perhaps deeper conversations around the material and higher level thinking. But of course, for the fixed activity, you need to think about how you're going to be capturing that for the students who can't attend. Certainly there's recording, but you may also want to consider having a summary created. You could assign, again, a role for one student to be a scribe for each class. And then it's their role to synthesize and capture the key ideas and perhaps extend that before posting it back to the online discussion forum following class, so that students who couldn't participate can use that as a springboard for then continuing conversation online afterwards, and you may have some specific follow-up questions for those students to continue interacting with the full class afterwards as well. So it kind of extends the time frame around which you can have discussions, and potentially means that you can dig even deeper. So on that note, I just would like to direct you to some the setup resources for the My Courses discussion forums. You have resources through the IT knowledge base with the links here on creating discussions and the settings. Also Brightspace or My Courses tutorials, and last but not least, the My Courses Essentials. With the discussion forum actually in my Courses Essentials is actually a nice way, if you're not so familiar with how the discussion forums are set up or what they look like, you can actually go on there and participate by asking questions. Those are monitored discussion boards, so you will get a response. So on that note, I would like to open up the time for questions, and this, of course, is questions for all of the presentations so far. So thank you so much for your time. Again, we'll be sharing resources with you so you can explore this further.
So I think